everyone, we are going to read The Twits together. It's one of my favourite books. We're going to post it on our YouTube page. We'll read a couple of chapters each time and we'll see how we go. It's my favourite book. It's full of nasty characters and some quite disgusting things, which I'm sure some of you would like. The first chapter is called Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it's impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this: how often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic into stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed, or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. The next chapter is Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit was one of those very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, were covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nose and ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that his hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand, but in truth, he was neither of these. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was the bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash his bristly nail brush face of his? The answer: never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Dirty beards. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed as often enough, and there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to it, especially food. Things like gravy go right in amongst it and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel and we can quickly look more or less right again. But he cannot. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens up his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunch and supper sticking around his face. There weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you look closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny specks of dried up scrambled egg stuck to the hairs, spinach and tomato ketchup, fish fingers and minced chicken liver, all of the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen, if you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out of his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese or a mouldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tin sardine. Because of this, Mr. Twit never really went hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What am I trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an incredibly horrid man, as you will find out in a moment.